Goes both ways because of the ongoing police investigation. LBC Travel, I'm Joanne Webb.
Nick Ferrari at breakfast. Call 0345 6060 973. Text 84850. Nick Ferrari at breakfast on LBC.
Good morning, it's 4 minutes after 9 on Thursday, September the 21st. These are, without doubt, troubling times. While it be considered that, notwithstanding those who sustained serious injuries, we got lucky with the bomb at Parsons Green that failed to detonate last week, it again underscored the divisions that are felt so keenly by so many in society. Whether it's matters of faith or commerce, or do I even say Brexit, how united is the country at this time? And if the answer is, regrettably, in the negative, how can faith possibly act as a soothing balm? Well, this is A Call to Faith with the Archbishop of Canterbury, Most Reverend Right Honourable Justin Welby, joined by, I'm pleased to welcome to the studio, a prominent Imam, Imam Qari Asim, who's a senior Imam at the Makkah Mosque in Leeds. Welcome. Thank you very much for coming, and I'll come to you in a moment if I may, sir. It's good to see you again, Archbishop. Thank you.
Thank you.
I talk about those divisions in society. The Brexit row has continued since we last met. There's been some horrific and desperately regrettable acts of terror as well. How do you see society at this time?
I think you're right that there are significant divisions, but I don't think that we should be intimidated or fearful as a result. This country is a place of immense solidity and stability compared to many that I work in, and has the resources to flourish enormously in the future. Terrorism.
Can I put post-Brexit in those words, Archbishop, when you say flourish in the future?
Where would you put post-Brexit in that sentence?
So you feel that there's enough solidity in the country, there's enough will, there's enough drive, there's enough enthusiasm, that whatever the economics may be, we will find a path through?
If we make the right decisions, we will find a path through. If we're united, if we stick together. Terrorism, we've had terrorism before. We've had much worse than terrorism. Go back 70 years, 80 years to the Blitz. You know, we came through that, and this country...
Some would argue that was not from within,
It was not from within, but if you go back to the 70s and 80s, and I remember as a Londoner the IRA bombing then, and hearing bombs go off, and they were pretty frequent for a while. We are, as a country, bigger than this. We're more diverse, we're more exciting, we have more resource. I am full of hope.
Questions coming to you in just a moment. I wonder if I can bring you in just briefly, Imam. After some of the outrages that we've seen, questions are asked about people within your faith, how they misrepresent your faith. And I have to put it to you, some would argue, how your faith is so easily misrepresented. How would you respond, Imam?
Sure. So extremism is an unprecedented global phenomenon. And we have to say that disproportionate number of attackers come from my community, the Muslim community. But we have to make a distinction between the faith Islam and the religious motivation that is used by ISIS affiliates to recruit young people. Religion is a unique passion, and the ISIS recruiters and other extremists, they use religion for their own geopolitical aims and gains. So I think extremism, terrorism is something that we all have to deal with, but I totally appreciate that as a Muslim I have a double responsibility to ensure that not one more person is recruited from my community to kill fellow Brits.
And are you confident that's being done across the whole of the country by other imams such as yourself?
I think a lot has been done in the last 10 years, but we cannot be complacent. So for instance, I and fellow imams constantly are talking about extremism and how this affects us all in this society. When a fellow Brit is killed, when a fellow Brit is injured, I'm really sick to my stomach. Because effectively we're all in it together, and just by standing together, living together, working together, we send out a very strong message to extremists, whether it be the Islamist extremists or the far-right extremists, that we are united and this is our country, and an attack on any single one of fellow Brits is an attack on all of us.
You wanted to get it. Archbishop, just move the mic just slightly closer so everyone have the full benefit of your words. You wanted to get involved, Archbishop.
I was just going to say I entirely agree with Imam, particularly on his opening words. Terrorism, extremism is an unprecedented global phenomenon. We're seeing it in all the major faiths and areas of non-faith. There is a growth in extremism and extremist violence as a way of pursuing a cause. that we're seeing around the world for the first time on this scale, probably in global history, and that is what we have to address ourselves to. I've also would add that in the imams I know, the Muslim community we know and deal with, we've seen an unprecedented coming together against terrorism, a real thoughtfulness about how to deal with it. In a way that I think shows the strength and solidity of that community.
A call to faith, so let's get your calls. Please indicate that you can hear clearly Imam and Archbishop, as I put Martim in Edinburgh through. Martim, go ahead.
Good morning. Good morning, Nick.
Good morning, Martim.
Hi. I would like to ask our respected Archbishop and the respected Imam, the genocide that's happening in Myanmar, in Burma, what is their position there and what needs to be done and where are we going from there?
Let's start with the Archbishop. Stay on the line, Martim. I will come back to you. Archbishop.
Martim, thank you for the question. The genocide in Myanmar is utterly appalling and everyone should condemn it unhesitatingly. There needs to be significant pressure on all those involved, all those who can do something about it. It's a big question for the UN, and the faith communities need to work hard to support the refugees. I know that our small churches in that area, both in Bangladesh and Myanmar, are working very hard, along with many others from many communities and faiths, to support the refugees and the victims of this extreme violence.
Should Mrs May be doing more, Archbishop?
I don't know what is possible there. We certainly need to be taking aid to the refugees. I believe that that is happening, emergency aid. And I know that the government, from answers in Parliament, the government has been putting pressure on the government in Myanmar.
And the de facto leader, before I come to you, Imam, back to you, Archbishop, but the de facto leader, Aung San Suu Kyi, surely we should look for more action from her, or leadership at least.
Yes, I mean, it's easy to stand outside a country, isn't it? Remember, this has just moved from military government in the last couple of years. And she does need to give a lead, but we also need to recognise that if she loses her position, if things go badly wrong in Myanmar, it is not going to stop the genocide. It will make it worse.
But you must be disappointed in the lack of leadership or lack of action she showed to date.
I'm always careful about expressing judgment on people whose situations I do not fully understand.
I know, that's what annoys me about you. I keep trying to push and you just won't, Archbishop. This is a practice you're sticking to. We're going to have to talk about that in a moment. To you, Imam. And just, of course, this particularly speaks to you to remind my listeners, this is hundreds of thousands of Rohingya Muslims, a stateless minority in a Buddhist majority state, effectively being bullied, harassed, and in some cases, some might even say ethnically cleansed. Can I use that expression in your view, Imam?
Yeah, I think it's utterly abhorrent what's happening with the Rohingya Muslim community, and in particular, like almost 22 years after we saw what happened in Srebrenica, where the Muslims genocide took place, we are again faced with where effectively the UN has said it's a crime against humanity. So I think we all need to do a lot more, our governments, the international community, and also I would urge that we're talking about the global phenomenon being terrorism. Here we have a particular community, the Buddhist community, against Muslim community, and this is how effectively things like that result in recruiters using in such situations to recruit more and radicalize more people.
And again, I've got to put to you, to the Burmese leader, would you have wanted to see more from her? How would you characterise what she's done to date?
I think we need to see more leadership, and effectively where it comes to people's huts being burned, villages upon villages being burned. Prompt action needs to be taken against the Burmese government, whether it be trade sanctions, whether it be other things, to effectively stop ethnic cleansing take place.
And so it is ethnic cleansing in your view, Imam?
I would say so, yeah.
All right, OK, thank you for that. We've moved another one. No, let's move on. Alison in Crawley Down. Alison, you're on the radio. Go ahead, your question. Good morning.
Hi, thanks for taking my question. I just wanted to say the utter tragedy of Grenfell has highlighted for many of us, or raised a question for many of us about the value we place on human life and whether we value all lives equally. The fact that those residents' real concerns were ignored, I know the inquiry will look at that, but there are lots of people in modern Britain, lots of Daniel Blakes, who feel that their issues are ignored. So I just wanted to ask, as faith leaders, do you feel that people are being ignored in our society? And what do you think we should do about that? How can that be addressed?
Stay on the line. Let's bring the Imam in first on this one. The division. Daniel Blake is a movie I'm sure you're familiar with, just to explain the Ken Loach film in case you... Yeah. How do you think that has been reflected as regards post-Grenfell?
I agree with Alison. I think we must value all lives equally, and therefore I think there are lessons to be learned from Grenfell tragedy, and effectively there's ongoing inquiry. I think we must wait for the result of that inquiry, but ensure that actually people's needs are met, and a particular community, whether it be asylum seekers or others, are not blamed because of their circumstances.
Archbishop, we can't comment on what as regards building and building regulations need to be learnt from Grenfell, because that's the job of Sir Martin Milbeck and his inquiry. What someone like you can touch on is what it tells about community cohesion, possibly, as many of the people down there would say, the division between rich and poor in one of the wealthiest boroughs in the land. How do you respond, Archbishop?
I think you put your foot on it.
With my finger.
Your finger on it, dear, oh dear. And Alison, I think, you used exactly the right word when you used the word voiceless. I think that one of the problems with institutions, organisations, governments, churches, we're not immune, is that we don't listen. And one of the things we see in Grenfell, we know, was that the community was raising its voice and its voice was not heard. I was up around there on the day of the fire with hundreds of other clergy and Muslim leaders and community leaders seeking to help those caught up in it. And I think I was struck partly, it had taken this for them to have the attention they were getting.
Were you struck, as I was, by the anger as well? There's considerable anger and unrest, Archbishop.
There is considerable anger and unrest, and when you look at what happened, it is fully understandable and reasonable that there should be anger. If we're not angry over roughly 80 people being killed in that way, then what are we? We're not really human if we're not angry. And I think there is a problem that there are groups of people, Daniel Blake is a brilliant film in describing this, whose voices cannot be heard through the system. And that, Alison put her finger on it when she said voiceless. And I think that is something that we have to find ways of listening better.
And when, lastly, you see that some people they've yet to be housed. They're put in hotels and temporary housing, but they've yet to have what's called a full housing offer still all this time. How do you respond?
I respond by saying we must be able to do better. It's 3 months now. It's a long time. Why does it take so long? We've done things in the past when they really matter. We can be incredibly quick, and that says to me, that makes me ask the question: is it getting the priority it should? The point is, at the heart of Christian faith is Christ showed us the dignity of each individual human being is equal, and when we take that seriously, then we act quickly.
One question to you, and then I'll bring Imam in on a call. This is via a text. Mary, can you ask the Archbishop, will he feel awkward when he next sits in the House of Lords? And I sense Mary refers to a report in which you don't feature, how taxpayers have paid £1.2 million to 115 peers who didn't speak once during any debate during the whole year. And there's also considerable sums spent on some of the peers who speak very, very infrequently. It's the latest Lords scandal, Archbishop.
Yes. Mary is making a very proper point. What
would you say to these people? Are they taking money under false pretences?
I don't know if they're... I haven't read the report yet. I think I know for myself that I consider it one of the greatest privileges of my life to be allowed to sit in Parliament as long as I'm doing this job and as long as Parliament decides that's right. I go in there as often as I can.
Yes, but you talk regularly, so you earn your corn, if you will.
I try and earn my corn, and...
Well, these blokes and women don't, sir.
Well, I think people who have the privilege of being in the House should not only turn up, but should work in the House and play a part in the life of the House. A lot of people in the House of Lords express the view that it's too big at the moment. Many, many peers are saying that. And I think that's something that this story makes even more urgent, that we consider how to deal with that.
So it is too big, Archbishop?
I think it's too big.
There's over 800 of you.
There's over 800, yes. I can tell you the number of bishops hasn't gone up.
No. But it is unwieldy.
It's totally unwieldy, and it's noticeable that there's a core that work very, very hard indeed, and others who take it very seriously, and when they come in for a good reason and contribute. But we shouldn't be taking money just for doing nothing.
So a reform, and possibly we need to retain a second chamber, though, an upper house, whatever you want to call it.
We need an upper house. You need a revising chamber. The house at its best is when it's working line by line through complicated legislation that has come up from the Commons in a way that is not really good. And the experts in the area, and there are world experts on every subject in the House of Lords, are focusing on each line and saying, and working out how to make it work better. That's what a revising chamber and upper house should do.
Let's go to the calls. David, you're through in St Albans. David in St Albans, you're through to the Imam and to the Archbishop. Go ahead, David. Good morning, sir.
Good morning. I was going to ask about Islam as a religion, but first of all, are we aware that the Burmese government, or who the Burmese government has been, or the army has been fighting against?
Right.
And
if you don't consider me desperately rude, we have dealt with that. I'd rather move on to the other question, if that's all right, David. So can I ask you to move to your other question?
Well, you say you've dealt with it, but I think the army is actually fighting against Islamic terrorists.
Okay, all right.
They're not just killing civilians.
All right. Okay, well, I'm sure the Imam will pay heed to that in his answer to your main question, which is something I think about. I have a note here, it's about the Quran. Is that correct?
Yes, it's called. It likes to be referred to as the religion of peace. But there are 109 verses in the Quran exhorting Muslims to kill the infidel, and that's anybody who isn't a Muslim.
Right.
And this is what is causing all the problems.
Okay, stay on the line. I wonder if you can wrap that into two questions. It's causing the problems, possibly causing the problems that we're seeing in Myanmar or Burma. Imam.
David, thank you for your question. That's very pertinent. I think firstly we need to distinguish between Islam as a faith and terrorism. Terrorism has no religion. We've seen across the globe that actually terrorists or extremists are using various passions and ideologies to motivate and encourage people to kill people. Now, having said that, I said at the very outset that we do need to acknowledge that there are people who are using verses of the Quran and manipulating them, using them out of context, because in any religious scripture we will find that there are verses which will talk about violence, because especially the Holy Quran, it revealed, over the period of 23 years, it dealt with the issues affecting the Prophet's life at the time, and therefore there are context-based verses. And I and other Imams across the country and across the globe have said time and again, those verses do not apply to the current situation, and therefore
so he is right when he talks about 100 plus verses talking about that level of violence.
There are no 109 verses in the Holy Quran talking about violence, but I'm saying in any scripture you will find verses talk about violence and talk about retribution, talk about vengeance, because effectively the Quran, like other scriptures, deals with human life.
So why is it in your faith it would appear they're so easily misinterpreted or so easily manipulated?
I think I would like to disagree with that,
sure,
because effectively there are over 1 billion people. There are almost 1.7 billion Muslims around the world, and not every single one of them is misinterpreting those verses to actually go on a killing spree. These are effectively terrorists who are using verses of the Quran for their geopolitical aims and gains. And the way to defeat them is effectively for us to show that in all of this, that we all three of us are us and them. When in the us and them narrative, we are all together, and it's those who are misinterpreting those verses, we need to defeat them by our own examples.
Archbishop, do you recognise that there are, I could now, and I obviously don't have anything like the knowledge of the Bible that you have, but I could find passages of a similar theme, similar tone?
Oh yes, certainly within the Old Testament of the Christian Bible, you find verses about killing, about retribution. And you find in the Bible the expression of every human emotion. The question is how you interpret that now, how you deal with that now, and similarly, the context is completely different, and we must you interpret that in our scriptures in the light of the life and death and resurrection of Jesus Christ, which means we say that everything we read is interpreted in the light of a God who is revealed as love and who offers forgiveness, pardon and reconciliation. And that's how we re-look at the passages about violence in the Old Testament.
Let's come to some more of the emails. Archbishop, I'll stay with you if I may. This is from Rachel in Bexley. Conservative MP Jacob Rees-Mogg got in a lot of trouble when he said his views about abortion and rape and incest on the television. He says he was just following his religion. Is he right? Do you like that word?
I'm sorry, I didn't catch her name.
Rachel in Bexley. Rachel,
thank you very much, Rachel. Different.
You knew this was coming, Archbishop. You would have known this question was coming in some way, shape, or form.
I wasn't exactly astonished.
After that,
no, there are different views on abortion within the Christian faith, and for that matter, on lots of other things. The view that Jacob Rees-Mogg expressed was one particular view which I'm not sure is held invariably within the Roman Catholic Church, and is certainly not held within the Church, within the Anglican Communion, that there are no circumstances in which abortion is right at all, under any circumstances whatsoever. The circumstances in which the taking of any human life is permissible are invariably terrible, whether it's in war, with abortion, or any other circumstances. They are always nightmare circumstances. And we have to start with an expression of love and compassion for those caught up in those circumstances. And our decisions have to flow from that. But we have to hold to the dignity of human life. And certainly in common with the rest of the Christian Church, we believe that human life begins at conception.
Yes.
And therefore, the baby in the womb requires legal protection in the same way as any other human being. It doesn't mean there won't be dreadful times when horrible decisions have to be taken.
Such as incest or rape or matters.
In very extreme circumstances.
Yeah.
But you have to start with love, compassion, and standing with people. And I'm not accusing Jacob Rees-Mogg of doing anything else. He's a man of great dignity, profound compassion.
And did he show dignity in his stance on that particular issue? I think you fundamentally disagree with him. That doesn't mean you can't admire his dignity.
No, I think it was he spoke very courageously and very honestly and with great integrity, as he very often does.
Imam, a view from you. You're familiar with the story, the interview that he gave.
I am indeed.
Yeah, sure.
I think, obviously, I can't speak for Jacob, but I totally agree with the Archbishop that dignity of human life is very important, and we have to find the expression of love, and to ensure that each life is treated sacredly and protected. And there might be horrible times when really difficult decisions have to be made.
Okay, let's go to some more calls. Valerie in Lambeth. Valerie, you're on the radio. Go ahead, Valerie. Good morning.
Yes, I would like to ask the Archbishop and the Imam, why is there this terrible deafening silence about what's happening to Christians? Christians actually being crucified in this day and age.
Do you mean? I assume you mean in the parts of the Middle East? Is that what you're referring to?
Parts of the Middle East,
okay.
of course. Not
Valerie in Lambeth, not far from the Archbishop. Stay on the line. Actually, we'll start with you for me.
Well, there certainly
there has been a silence. Actually, I think I've heard you talk about it.
Well, thank you, thank you. That I have talked about it a huge amount. Yes. I've been to the places where it's happening, in where Christians are being persecuted. I'm in touch with Christians who are being persecuted. I speak about Christians being persecuted. We've raised it in Parliament.
It's break your heart, Archbishop.
It is to go to a place where there are these levels of extreme violence. I was, which I have done as recently as a few months ago, and where Christians are under pressure. We've challenged government. It is utterly heartbreaking. It is heartbreaking not only because they're Christians, but because they're human beings, which is why what's happening in Myanmar was rightly raised in the first question as being so important. God's love in Jesus Christ is for every human being to be able to live a life of dignity and security, and persecution of any kind by anyone is deeply wrong.
A word from you, Imam.
It is heartbreaking, any community being persecuted. I have spoken about it. I was in Egypt last week. I spoke about it there. Effectively, we've seen recent attacks in Egypt. Last year I was in Pakistan, spoke to the Pakistani government about it. I've written about it. I think it's effectively we all need to ensure that no single faith community or otherwise is persecuted. And it can only happen if we all come together. We talk about Islamophobia in this country. In the same breath, we need to be talking about persecution of other communities elsewhere in the world.
Just a quick word, Valerie. I have to say I have heard the Archbishop, and I've read the Archbishop talk. I don't think that there is a silence, Valerie. What makes you believe that there is?
Well, I took 10 people and we stopped in Oxford Street for a few hours, and hardly anyone knows anything about it.
Right.
Nobody's demonstrating about it. I have hardly seen a letter in the papers about it. I think there is an enormous, deathly silence about it.
Well, that may actually be one directed at the media rather than the men of faith who are there. Perhaps it's not getting much prominence there. Perhaps that's one I need to answer. Valerie, we'll thank you for your call. Let's do one last email before we go to the news, and I'm glad to say you're staying with some questions afterwards. This one comes in from Kenneth in Dartford. It was interesting to hear Kenneth in Dartford. It was interesting to hear the Archbishop comment on the movie I, Daniel Blake. What are his reviews on Food Bank Britain, with nurses having to use food banks, and what's his church doing about that? Archbishop.
Thank you, Kenneth, very much. One of my closest colleagues that I work with at Lambeth now has been leading a group called Feeding Britain, which is campaigning in Parliament on a cross-party basis with members from all parties on this. The churches all round the country, the huge numbers of churches, Church of England and other churches together, are organising food banks. I can think of plenty in my own diocese, in Diocese of Canterbury, in Dover, for instance, and Folkestone and other places. And thirdly, what do I think of Food Bank Britain? We need a country where food banks are unnecessary, are completely dispensed with because we don't need them. It is wrong that we are in a country where food banks for one reason or another are necessary.
And yet we're in a country where some of the bosses are having salaries the like of which have never been seen before, and bonuses that are paid sky high, and at the same time we've got a nurse who has to go around and get food from a food bank to feed his or her family.
Absolutely, and I've been in food banks and been with the people who come in. I mean, one of the wonderful things, of course, is when people go to them, they don't find that they're treated with disdain or contempt. They're treated with love and respect. Though we work in the north of England, yes, there are food banks with Islamic groups, but that doesn't mean the fact that we're doing it all over the country doesn't mean that it's a good thing to have them. I don't know anyone working in a food bank who wouldn't prefer for it to be completely unnecessary.
And yet Jacob Rees-Mogg, coming back to him, told me 2 weeks ago that food banks are, quotes, rather uplifting and shows what a compassionate country we are.
Well, they do show what a compassionate country we are, but there's got to be a better... in the way they operate, they are uplifting because they show the kindness and the gentleness and the generosity of human beings. But, there's an old thing, it goes back 30 or 40 years to a bishop in Central America who said, when I feed the poor, they call me a saint. When asked why they are poor, they call me a communist. And we have to ask why people are needing food banks. Of course we need to feed people. But we have to say, why is it necessary? And we have to change the system so it's no longer necessary. Look at some of the stuff Frank Field's done, which has been remarkable in tackling this.
A word from you, and I hear from the Archbishop, you work on very well considerably with this, with your faith as well.
Absolutely. I think firstly, it beggars belief that we are one of the largest economies in the world, and yet we have food banks in this country. I think it shows that, communities, the Muslim community and the other faith communities, in particular the Christian community, working together on food banks and twinning of churches, and I've fed on a regular basis homeless people and other. I think it really brings human compassion, but also I think it sends out a strong message to radicalizers and extremists. They effectively, in a very dire situation, communities do come together, they stand together, and we all work together for the betterment of our communities.
Imam, thank you. More calls to you, Imam, and to the Archbishop in a call of faith after this. LBC, time for the little bait to the 9:30 news with Thomas Watts.
A teenager's been arrested arrested by detectives investigating the Parsons Green terror attack, bringing the number of people being questioned to 6. The 17-year-old boy was held just after midnight in Thornton Heath. Hundreds of buildings have been destroyed as the search continues for survivors of Mexico's earthquake. It as Hurricane Maria has caused major flooding and caused the power network to fail in Puerto Rico. And Theresa May will brief the cabinet on her plans for Brexit this morning after returning from the UN in New York. The Prime Minister will set out the major speech she's due to make in Florence tomorrow. LBC weather, heavy rain and blustery winds moving across the country today, a high of 18 degrees.
LBC travel on the M25. It is very slow clockwise at junction 10 at the A3, and that was after an accident. All the lanes are back open now, but it remains very slow. In Hanwell, the Uxbridge Road is now back open, but I'm afraid it's still very busy in both directions, heading towards the cemetery. In Enfield, those roadworks on Southbury Road causing westbound queues again, extremely busy in the area. And on the A12 at Newbury Park, very slow eastbound to Woodford Avenue because the traffic lights have been damaged in an accident. LBC Travel, I'm Joanne Webb.
This is LBC.
Sometimes it can be hard to keep your show on the road, but new Car Genie from the AA makes things easier. Car Genie helps predict and prevent breakdowns. Just plug it into your car and it will warn you and us if there's a potential problem. That should keep you rolling. New Car Genie from the AA, because anything can happen. Compatible vehicles only. Check the AA.com for details.
We've been thinking about the nuclear family, that vision of mum, dad and their 2.4 children, and how times have changed, how we're now living longer and our kids are leaving home later. So we thought, with all this change, shouldn't we change the way we think about mortgages? So we now cater for all types of family and are trying to turn Generation Rent into Generation Buy. Mortgages for how life is now. NatWest. We are what we do.
Your home may be repossessed if you do not keep up repayments on your mortgage. After a long day at work, there's nothing Mark likes more than cooking a stir-fry. What he doesn't like is Gaz and Lecky getting out of control. So Mark's had a smart meter installed. Now he's able to see exactly how much energy he's using in pounds and pence and stir-fry to his heart's content. Only your energy supplier can carry out your smart meter installation, so contact them today.
Work doesn't end because you're not there. It's always 9 a.m. somewhere. There's always a call to take. And business doesn't sleep even when you do. eReceptionist lets you step outside the office and balance work with life. With eReceptionist, calls can be directed to a landline or your mobile. So wherever you are, you're local. And with our unique app, you can dial out from your landline number with your mobile. Take a free 30-day trial at ereceptionist.co.uk. Cancel within 30 days to avoid charges.
Westway, there's no other way.
From making an all-out statement with the stylish Nissan Juke to making full use of the all-round capabilities of the Nissan Qashqai, you'll be making a huge list price saving of up to £1,755 with Westway. And there's also up to a £2,500 deposit contribution through Nissan Finance. So for a great 67-plate Nissan deal,
Google Westway Nissan today.
Subject to status, representative 3.99% APR, not in conjunction with the Nissan Switch scheme.
Nick Ferrari at breakfast on LBC.
With Hampton by Hilton. Check in at your hotel with the Hilton Honours app.
James, you're going to be the next caller to A Call of Faith. Before we go to those calls, so Imam, I wonder if I can put something to you, maybe mildly confrontational. How confident are you that in a mosque anywhere in the United Kingdom at the moment, if it felt that someone was perhaps becoming a little bit misguided, was picking up the wrong messages, was sympathising in the wrong fashion, how confident are you that the relevant member of the mosque would tell one of the authorities?
I think mosques are places of worship. Mosques are where people are taught how to love and show compassion to others. Having said that, there are lots of mosques around the country, and I cannot be confident that every single mosque, is effectively above board. That is the job of the intelligence services. But having said that,
it's also the job, respectfully, of the imams.
Absolutely,
it's not just down to our spies.
I'll come on to that.
Okay.
Whether it's in London or Manchester or elsewhere, wherever we've seen that actually there are extremist elements emerging in the mosque, imams and the local authorities, local boards of those mosques have actually reported to the intelligence services, have reported to the police. We do not want extremists and terrorists in our ranks for a number of reasons. Firstly, these extremists, they abuse our faith. Secondly, that we do not want to lose our young people to these radicalizers who are effectively turning them into suicide bombers. Thirdly, whenever there's a terrorist attack, it leads to a rise in Islamophobia, and as a result, no right-minded community would ever want extremists and terrorists in their ranks. I am part of Imam's Online. I'm senior editor of Imam's Online. We believe that radicalization takes place online. There are recruiters out there who are grooming young people, like the pedophiles groom young people to become radicals.
So I have to ask you, should the people on Facebook, on Google and elsewhere, should they be showing more responsibility? Should they be taking down this material
quicker? We are working with the internet and social media providers. I think the social media giants do have a responsibility to ensure that there is that we reoccupy the space that's currently being occupied by radicalizers and by hate preachers.
And it's not just Archbishop, it's not just perverted measures of Islam and how to make bombs. There's even material up there where you hear speeches from Hitler, which is played over images of Jews being marched. It's a Jewish New Year today, so Shana Tova. Jewish people being marched to the concentration. These are more responsible. These companies should be policing this, shouldn't they?
Absolutely, they should. And they have incredibly sophisticated systems. I don't think anyone outside these companies has yet understood why it seems to take so long to deal with some of this stuff. I've talked to Jewish leaders who are being abused online and just get a dead bat approach every time they get hold of the relevant.
But we need to look to in Germany. They're moving to fine these firms. That's
absolutely.
And I think we need to look at that.
Absolutely. If you disseminate hate material against anyone, it should be a serious problem. You've got to take responsibility. You earn the money from the process.
Yeah, $300 billion the value of some of these companies. We looked at it today.
Absolutely.
And so time for fines.
It's time for fines.
James is in Kensington. You're through to A Call of Faith. James, good morning, sir.
Good morning, Nick. The Archbishop's predecessor, Rowan Williams, he gave a lecture to the Royal Courts of Justice in 2008 in which he said that adoption of elements of Sharia law in the UK seems unavoidable. And I wanted to understand if the current Archbishop shares that view.
Stay on the line and we'll bring the Imam in a moment, Archbishop.
No, I don't. I'm not sure actually that's precisely what he said, but leaving that aside, I don't think that we should have elements of Sharia law in the English jurisprudential system. We have a philosophy of law in this country, and you can only really cope with one philosophy of law within a jurisprudential system. I think we, even within Islam, as I understand it, the Imam may well rightly correct me, not everyone agrees that we do need that. They would say that where the spirit of the jurisprudential system in this country has cares for the individual, for the family, for the community, it is in a sense Sharia conforming, and we do not need Sharia law. So I'm not in favour of that.
Even in civil cases, Archbishop?
Even in civil cases. Oh, well, certainly not in criminal cases.
No, but even in
I don't think, certainly Rowan Williams was not proposing that.
He thought matters, I should say, I'm so sorry, such as Sharia divorce and matters such as that.
And
but again, you're against that.
I think we have a system that works perfectly well as it is without adopting a different jurisprudential philosophy.
Imam.
I think perhaps Dr. Rowan Williams was misunderstood. We're not talking about here having Sharia law parallel to the English legal system. Within my faith, Islam says that you have to abide by the law of the country, and as a result, Muslims do abide in civil and criminal matters, law of the country. Having said that, we have Sharia councils where effectively divorce cases are discussed. Currently, the government has set up a panel to review Sharia councils, and if we wait the result of that review review panel, but effectively, I think we are not advocating, Muslims in this country are not advocating a parallel system to the English legal system. And I think if marriages are registered in this country, divorces can take place in courts in this country, and therefore we may not necessarily need Sharia councils.
But then we might not necessarily need, but then again we might need them.
I think there will have to be a transitory period. So we can't suddenly, the Sharia councils exist now only to deal with divorce issues, civil divorce issues.
But you're uncomfortable with that,
in certain cases. And if we are to abolish them immediately overnight, there's going to be a huge number of people who are going to suffer. So in order to phase things out, we need to take gradual steps. But I'm saying that the English legal system can deal with Islamic divorces.
I think that's a very sensible comment. I'm very relaxed about that, and but the point is, the English courts always have to prevail under all circumstances, always.
And Muslims would welcome that.
Yes, and that's exactly right.
Yeah.
And my Muslim friends say the same thing.
All right, we move to the last couple of questions, one of which is going to be from email, and one of which is Paul down the line. I'll come to Paul for you in a moment. This comes from Wendy in West Wickham, who asks of the Archbishop, Imam, I'll get a word from you as well, I assure you, sir. A Christian couple are going to sue a primary school because their son has to go to school with a boy who's wearing a dress. They say it's down to religion. Are they right in so doing?
I've been struggling with this. I make a point of not commenting on particular cases because you just never know the whole story.
Respectfully, Archbishop, what do you need to know? There's a 6-year-old boy who's now not in class because one of his classmates, who is a boy, likes to go to school dressed in a dress.
And I don't know the school, and I don't know the parents, and I haven't listened to them. I would say, for us, our kids went all the way through their schooling in the local state schools. There were bits we liked, bits we didn't like, and it is the home where you educate and train people in following faith, in following Christian faith. And I would say, where there's something like that happens, in general terms, the best... I never see that... I'm sorry, Imam, I know you're a solicitor. I never see the point of going to law. I think that we should try and solve these things without legal involvement and with mediation, with people getting together around the table with a mediator to help them come to a conclusion.
But Archbishop, one of your flock comes to you and says, I have a 6-year-old boy in class who's sitting next to a 6-year-old boy who wears a dress. I don't think it's consistent with my faith. What would your guidance be then? We don't need a lawyer there.
I would say to them, I don't think that's a problem. The other family are making up their own minds. The other child is making up their own mind. Talk to your child, help them to understand, help them to see what's going on and to be faithful to their own convictions.
Final question. I'll get a line from you, but this, I think, directed more to the Imam. It's Paul in Grays. Paul, go ahead. Your question to the Imam. Morning.
Yeah, morning, Nick. Morning, gents. Recently, Nick, you had a prison warden on the show, and he said that he wasn't allowed to enter the mosques when there was someone connected to terrorism. Surely, I want to ask the Imam, is it time now to ban all mosques from prisons?
I'm going to just say it because it's a bit of a clunky line. We took a caller, Imam, who said that he had spent time, he was a prison warder, so he'd worked in prisons, and people convicted of terror offence went to mosques, and prison wardens were not allowed to enter those mosques. Now, we have to take that on what we were told. A quick response from you, if you would.
I think, broadly speaking...
Should we have mosques in jail?
Should we have mosques in jail?
Yes.
We should have places of worship.
And should the wardens be allowed to enter?
And the wardens should be allowed to enter because it's a communal place, and as people can worship with other people being present there. And I think we don't want to turn into a state where effectively everyone is watching or spying on others, but we all need to be vigilant because we are faced with an unprecedented extremist challenge, and we all need to be vigilant to ensure that everyone is safe and secure.
And just finally with you, Archbishop, I mentioned right at the top that this has recently been a time of division. The terrorists, they seek to put side against side, sect against sect, faith against faith. A final word from you on that, and why we just should not be listening to them and the messages they put out.
We live in an incredibly diverse society. We have the enormous privilege of freedom of religion. That is something we need to treasure and allow to be expressed. Where that is abused, all of us should stand against it, because the privilege of being able to worship as you choose, to believe as you choose is something that we've developed over hundreds of years, and to start confining that because of extremists is to allow the extremists to win and the fear they want to create to change our society for the worse.
Pleasure meeting you for the first time, Imam. Thank you. That's Imam
Same
Kwari
here, Nick.
Asim. Thank you for your time, sir.
Thank you.
For a solicitor, you're a good bloke. And you're from the Makkah Mosque in Leeds. My thanks also, of course, to the Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby.
Thank you, Nick.
See you again. You're listening to LBC, where travel is next.
Thanks, Nick. Well, it's very slow on the M25 clockwise to junction 10 at the A3, and that was after an accident that happened earlier. In Newbury Park, there are delays on the A12 eastbound between Horns Road and the Gants Hill roundabout because the traffic lights have been damaged in an accident. In Hanwell, there are queues on the Uxbridge Road after an accident earlier, but the Uxbridge Road itself is now all back open. But in East Acton, Old Oak Common Lane remains